Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Saturday, May 24th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. It looks like a beautiful day in Riverside, with the high temperature expected to reach a comfortable 78.5 degrees and a low tonight around 60.2 degrees. Perfect weather to get out and about. Coming up on the show, we will be examining the reasons former President Trump is discussing the possibility of new tariffs on goods from Europe and on smartphones, exploring the potential impacts. Then, we will shift our focus to California politics, looking into why so few of the state's costly bills that get rejected manage to make a legislative comeback. We have got these stories and more insights for you. Stay with us on Alex's News. We're starting this morning with some significant developments on the international trade front. President Trump appears to be doubling down on his trade war posture, and it's causing quite a stir. For more on this, we have our news reporter Ethan with us. Ethan, what exactly has the president announced?
Well, Grace, it's certainly a development that's making headlines. According to reports from Yahoo Finance and WCAX, both citing the Associated Press, President Trump announced yesterday, May 23rd, his intention to impose a sweeping 50% tariff on all imports from the European Union. That's a pretty hefty figure.
50% on all EU imports? That's a massive escalation. Was there anything else included in this announcement?
Yes, there was. Alongside that, he proposed a 25% tariff on smartphones manufactured outside the United States. This would directly target major players like Apple and Samsung. And here's the kicker President Trump stipulated: these tariffs would take effect on June 1st, 2025, which is just 8 days from today, unless these products are built or manufactured right here in the U.S.
8 days. That's a very short deadline. What's the reasoning behind these rather aggressive moves? It seems like Has really trying to tariffy the waters.
That's a good way to put it, Grace. Yahoo Finance and WCAX report that these threats stem from President Trump's frustration over what he sees as a lack of progress in trade talks with the EU. This is despite information mentioned by WCAX and detailed further by Perplexity API that the EU had previously proposed a mutual, quote, 0 for 0, end quote, tariff reduction. Essentially, no tariffs on either side for certain goods.
A 0 for 0 offer sounds pretty straightforward. Why would that be rejected?
That's the million-dollar question, or perhaps the billion-dollar tariff question. Reports from LinkedIn, citing AP News and Perplexity API, indicate President Trump rejected that offer, insisting instead on a baseline 10% tariff on most imports. Furthermore, a LinkedIn post by Bill George, who is an executive fellow at Harvard Business School, noted that Trump's plan even involves charging higher tariffs on EU goods than on Chinese products. Tariffs on Chinese goods were recently reduced to 30% to, as they say, facilitate ongoing negotiations.
So it's not just about the EU then. What are the broader stated motives here?
According to Yahoo Finance, the primary stated motives are to reduce the U.S. trade deficit with the EU and to encourage domestic manufacturing. However, Perplexity API sources suggest there are additional U.S. objectives. These tariffs might also be used as leverage to push European nations to increase their NATO defense spending, with President Trump reportedly suggesting targets as high as 5% of their GDP. There's also talk of encouraging greater EU purchases of U.S. oil and gas and seeking the removal of regulatory barriers for U.S. meat products.
It sounds like a multi-pronged strategy. You mentioned smartphones and Apple earlier. Is there specific pressure on them?
Absolutely. Yahoo Finance highlighted that President Trump has directly pressured companies like Apple to shift their manufacturing operations to the U.S., expressing displeasure with Apple's investments in India. This is particularly interesting because Apple's CEO Tim Cook had previously stated that most iPhones sold in the U.S. would be coming from India.
So how is the European Union responding to these threats? They can't be too pleased.
No, they certainly are not. EU trade official Maros Sefcovic, as cited by Yahoo Finance and WCAX, stated that the EU is committed to securing a mutually beneficial deal but will, quote, defend its interests, end quote. He emphasized that EU-US trade must be, quote, guided by mutual respect, not threats, end quote, a sentiment also echoed in Perplexity API reports. And German Foreign Minister Johann Vadeful warned, according to Yahoo Finance, that these proposed tariffs would hurt both markets.
Has the EU announced any specific retaliatory tariffs in response to yesterday's news?
This is where it gets a bit complex. Perplexity API reports indicate that as of today, the European Union has not publicly detailed or officially proposed any new specific retaliatory measures directly corresponding to President Trump's May 23rd announcements. However, that doesn't mean they're unprepared. Perplexity API notes that public consultations were launched in early May concerning potential countermeasures related to earlier U.S. tariffs, including those on automotive and aluminum products.
So they had plans in the works already?
Precisely. Perplexity API sources highlight that the EU had already formulated and merely delayed the implementation of significant reciprocal tariffs against U.S. goods. These could involve increases up to 50% on certain products, with a threatened start date as early as June 1, 2025, in response to previous U.S. trade actions. These pre-existing EU tariff plans, detailed by Perplexity API, ranged from 4.4% to 50% on approximately €8 billion worth of U.S. goods, targeting items such as luxury goods, wine, and whiskey. So it seems this latest move from President Trump might be, as Perplexity API suggests, a strategic maneuver within an ongoing escalation, possibly to preempt or reframe these substantial, pre-existing EU tariff plans.
It sounds like a very high-stakes game of trade chicken. What has the market reaction been to all of this?
Predictably negative, Grace. Both Yahoo Finance and WCAX reported a drop in the S&P 500 index following the announcement. Major U.S. companies, including Apple, Amazon, and Walmart, are now facing heightened uncertainty and potential inflationary pressures, according to Yahoo Finance. Bill George, in his LinkedIn analysis, also pointed out that while Apple had previously committed to investing $500 billion in U.S. factories, manufacturing iPhones domestically is widely considered impractical due to high costs, lack of skilled labor, and lengthy production timelines. The likely outcome, he suggests, would be higher consumer prices.
It seems like a taxing situation for everyone involved. Thanks so much for breaking all that down for us, Ethan. It's a complex issue with a lot of moving parts.
You're welcome, Grace.
We're turning now to Sacramento, where it seems the state's legislative agenda is facing a significant fiscal reality check. For more on this, we have our news reporter Chloe with us. Chloe, what's happening with all these legislative proposals in California?
It's quite a scene in Sacramento, Grace. As of today, May 24, 2025, California lawmakers have rejected hundreds of legislative proposals. This has been happening in a series of really rapid-fire hearings. Cal Matters, the nonprofit news organization, has been covering this extensively, and Perplexity API has also noted this significant culling of bills.
Hundreds of bills. That's a lot. What's the driving force behind this widespread rejection? Is it a case of legislative spring cleaning or something more serious?
It's definitely more serious, Grace. The primary reason, according to Cal Matters, is California's substantial budget deficit, which they report stands at a hefty $12 billion. This fiscal pressure is heavily influencing legislative decisions. Essentially, lawmakers are being compelled to shelve numerous proposals that would incur additional state costs. Perplexity API corroborates this, stating that legislators are really trying to control the state's budget deficit by halting potentially expensive or controversial legislation.
$12 billion is certainly a number that would make anyone pause. How exactly are these bills being shelved? What's the process here?
These culling sessions are formally known as suspense file hearings. Perplexity API explains that bills with a fiscal impact exceeding certain thresholds, specifically $50,000 in the Senate or $150,000 in the Assembly, are referred by a majority vote of committee members to the Appropriations Committee's suspense file. The fate of these bills is then decided on what's called Suspense Day. It's a marathon hearing where committees announce which bills will advance and which will effectively be held or killed for the session.
A suspense file? That sounds rather dramatic. You mentioned these hearings are rapid fire. CalMatters has raised some concerns about the transparency of this process, haven't they?
They have, Grace. CalMatters highlighted that lawmakers often rush through these bills, and many decisions can be made with little public deliberation, which can effectively silence the voices of regular citizens who might support or oppose these measures. Perplexity API similarly described these hearings as being known for being secretive and fast-moving. It's a process that, while efficient for culling bills, doesn't always lend itself to open debate on each item.
So it sounds like a lot of potential laws are getting caught in this fiscal net. Can you give us some examples of the notable measures that failed to advance?
Absolutely. Both CalMatters and Perplexity API highlighted the rejection of a proposal that would have exempted service workers' tips from state income tax. That was a significant one. Perplexity API also mentioned that proposals aimed at expanding healthcare access were among those culled. CalMatters further specified other defeated bills, including proposals for tax credits for parents and the establishment of a new state-funded research institute. The rejections, as reported by Perplexity API, really spanned a wide range of topics, from healthcare and taxation to new regulations, underscoring just how broad the impact of these budget constraints is.
It really paints a picture of ambition meeting a fiscal wall. So for these bills that have been held in the suspense file, is this the end of the line for them, or is there a legislative lifeline?
It's not necessarily the absolute end, Grace, though it's a significant setback. Perplexity API has detailed several procedural pathways that exist within the California legislature that could allow these same bills, or substantively identical versions, to be reconsidered. They could be amended to mitigate those fiscal concerns and potentially passed later within this current 2025 legislative session.
That's interesting. What kind of maneuvers are we talking about?
There are a few common ones. For instance, bills can be amended to reduce their fiscal impact, perhaps by modifying the scope or phasing in implementation. The tip exemption bill, for example, could theoretically be phased in gradually. Authors can also reintroduce a bill with substantial changes that address the initial fiscal objections. Then there's something called the gut and amend maneuver. This is where lawmakers take an existing, viable bill, remove its entire content, and replace it with new language, often from a bill previously held on suspense. The new content, however, must still relate to the bill's original subject matter. There are also options like designating a bill as a 2-year bill, carrying it over to the 2026 session, or incorporating policy changes into budget trailer bills, which are used to implement the state budget.
So there are ways to revive these proposals. But how often do these revival tactics actually work, especially for major, costly bills within the same session? Is there a track record?
That's where it gets a bit murky, Grace. Perplexity API conducted an inquiry and found a lack of specific, recent historical examples from roughly 2015 to 2024, where significant policy bills initially held in the suspense file due to substantial fiscal concerns were successfully revived and passed into law later in the *same legislative session. Perplexity API also found limited specific data or detailed analyses from that period, quantifying the success rate of these revival tactics for major bills. While committee reports document the outcomes of suspense file hearings, they don't typically provide detailed analyses of revival success rates. And, as Perplexity API noted, during periods of budget deficits like the one California is currently facing, the overarching focus on managing fiscal priorities naturally limits the appetite for reviving costly bills. It seems a comprehensive analysis of legislative records would be needed to really quantify this.
It sounds like while hope isn't entirely lost for these bills, the path forward is certainly challenging, especially with that budget deficit looming large. It's a real balancing act for lawmakers. Chloe, thank you for breaking all of that down for us and shedding light on this complex legislative process.
You're welcome, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis and the state legislature have made a significant policy reversal, scrapping controversial plans to develop golf courses, hotels, and pickleball courts within some of the state's most cherished state parks. The initial proposal, unveiled in August 2024 as part of the Great Outdoors Initiative, targeted 9 parks and sparked immediate public outrage. Conservationists and citizens protested vigorously, leading Governor DeSantis to announce in the fall that the plans were going back to the drawing board. Subsequently, in May 2025, lawmakers unanimously passed Bill HB 209, which prohibits such commercial developments and ensures future projects focus on conservation-based recreation like hiking and nature study. The governor is expected to sign the bill, which would take effect July 1st. Turning to the U.S. Capitol, the Speaker of the House was observed in a moment of personal prayer at 3 a.m. This quiet act of reflection aligns with a long tradition of leaders seeking guidance within the historic building, particularly during times of intense legislative pressure and decision-making. Current Speaker Mike Johnson is known for his public connection to faith. Across the globe, a cultural perception in some African societies that associates a big belly with wealth and prosperity is having dire health consequences. This traditional view, where larger body size can symbolize affluence and good health, is contributing to rising obesity rates, particularly among women. Projections indicate that by 2030, around 45% of African women could be overweight or obese. This trend is fueling an increase in non-communicable diseases like diabetes and heart disease, posing a significant public health challenge that requires culturally sensitive interventions. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump is set to deliver the commencement address at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point on Saturday, May 24, 2025. This comes amid his administration's controversial crackdown on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within military academies. Earlier this year, in February 2025, West Point disbanded several student clubs focused on race, gender, and cultural heritage following executive orders. President Trump has also been critical of academy leadership. His speech is anticipated to touch upon these policy shifts at the prestigious institution. And finally, with the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season forecast to be above normal, safety directors in America's most vulnerable coastal regions are expressing deep concern. NOAA predicts a 60% chance of an active season, with 13 to 19 named storms, including 6 to 10 hurricanes and 3 to 5 potentially becoming major hurricanes. With ENSO conditions currently neutral, there's added uncertainty. Safety officials are particularly worried about protecting critical infrastructure, managing evacuations, and ensuring resource readiness, especially in areas like the Gulf Coast, mindful of past devastations like Hurricane Katrina. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Sonnet 3.7, Gemini Pro 2.5 Experimental, Gemini Flash 2.0, Perplexity Sonar Pro, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.